So it's unethical to do an experiment with a healthy human baby brain.
Right.
So for several years, scientists have relying on animal models, for example. We try to learn what happens in a mouse or in a monkey, and we extrapolate to humans. But as I pointed out, the human brain is so different from other species, so we need to understand how the human brain is formed. So here comes this new technology, which is a brain organoid. And a brain organoid is just the recapitulation of the human development inside the lab, using stem cells to grow every single step at these very early stages of neurodevelopment.
Let's explain what stem cells are, so this will make sense.
All right. Stem cells are cells that are immature. They don't have a fate defined yet. For example, you have your skin cells, you have your blood cells, you have your brain cells. All these cells have names right now because they already acquire some kind of identity. In the early stages of the embryogenesis, you have stem cells that are not defined yet. They are just self-replicating, and they will give rise to progenitor cells that later will form all the tissues in the body. So these cells, we call them pluripotent stem cells because they can form any tissues of the body.
So if they're given the right instructions or stimulus, they could become liver or brain.
Right.
You don't
right.
know, so you figured out how to induce them to becoming brain.
Yeah, we are brain makers. we develop protocols and recipes, formulas that we can add on these stem cells and instruct them or food them around to think that they are in the right environment to become the cell type that we want. And my lab has been optimizing these protocols to create what we call a brain organoid or a mini brain. Some people call them mini brains because they're just a very miniaturized version of the human brain. So last year, we learned how to grow these organoids to create functional neural networks. So that's one step ahead. So now
we have to explain what the functional network is.
Right. A functional network is when neurons start to talk to each other and form complex nets of information. So that's how our beginning of our cognition appears or arises in the early stages of neurodevelopment.
So the baby doesn't have all those connections.
The baby already have them, but they're not mature enough. And in the organoid, we never seen that before because we thought that it would be impossible to recreate that in vitro. And a brain organoid has intrinsic limitations. It's not vascularized, not all cell types are there. We don't even know if the conditions are the same condition as in utero. So we were quite skeptical that the networks would appear in these brain organoids. But so science has evolved to the point where we could tweak this protocol and make them actually form these networks. So now we open the possibility to study conditions where the brain is intact, but the networks are not. For example, conditions like autism or schizophrenia. So we don't see a major neuronal loss or a neurodegeneration in autism or schizophrenia.
But the network
is defective. So the question is, can we use these brain organoids to find new drugs or eventual gene therapy to help people with this kind of neurological conditions?
So understanding normal, how it works, how it's supposed to work, helps you identify what to do in situations where it didn't work the way we want it to work.
Exactly. That's how we do it. We always compare the disease condition with the neurotypical. That's what we call disease modeling in a dish. So we're doing this right now.
I remember years ago I met an Indian sitar player, and he gave me music to play for my children. And I said, why shouldn't I listen to it? And he said that I never developed the neural connections to hear all the sounds because those were not made when I was a baby. And when I could make those networks. You speak Portuguese and the sounds, I have to concentrate very hard to hear all of that, but your neural network was exposed to that and it was reinforced and created. So you're now looking at these kinds of networks that babies, that's how they learn and grow, and being able to develop them in a lab. So
It's
just, to me, amazing that you're able to do that in a laboratory.
And I think you now touch on other things which might be a little bit more complex. For example, we could use the same technology to make the same human brain more plastic or more adaptable or have more synapses or be more protective against neurodegeneration later in life. Would be nice to have a brain that is protected against Alzheimer's.
Yes.
So we can ask those questions and perhaps finding answers. And some of these answers might require early modulations of these networks at very early stages in development. So we, as a society, we have to discuss the ethical implications of those alterations.
As a parent, that's a tough question to think about, and in society, that's a tough question. I don't think we'll answer that today, but it's an important question because science is about to give us those options.
Right.
Well, as the search continues for effective treatments and a possible vaccine to cure COVID-19, the Catholic Benefits Association warns against the use of human embryonic stem cells and tissue from aborted babies in any clinical trials. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Martin Nussbaum. He is the General Counsel for the Catholic Benefits Association. Martin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
So, Martin, bring us up to speed on this. A number of lawmakers are asking, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, for this to be changed. But isn't there currently a ban in place on the use of tissue from aborted babies in clinical research?
Well, one would think so. And one of the things we saw with the Catholic Benefits Association back in 2015, when there was the undercover identification of a market selling baby parts, selling tissue from unborn babies, as we began asking, well, who's buying that tissue and whether somehow or another that had worked itself into the Affordable Care Act. And what we found is a sleeper provision within the Affordable Care Act, which mandates the seemingly innocuous requirement that employers cover in their plans clinical trials. We looked a little further and saw that the FDA had actually approved at least 36 clinical trials that utilize either human embryonic stem cells or they utilize actual tissue harvested from aborted fetuses. And the problem with this is most Catholic employers have no idea this is in their plan because the plan simply says they cover clinical trials and the HIPAA requirements don't allow them to find out if any of their employees are using it. And so we at the Catholic Benefits Association, which represents some 1,100 Catholic employers, including 62 dioceses, filed a petition with the HHS Office of Civil Rights, asking them to provide a religious exemption as required under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act for CBA members. So it's a serious problem. It's not really been given much publicity, but a lot of Catholic employers, including dioceses, are unwittingly paying for this and covering it in their plans.
I know that you met with Roger Severino, the director of the Office for Civil Rights at HHS, to talk about your objections to the Affordable Care Act's clinical trial mandate, which requires employers with health plans to cover the cost of such clinical trials. What's the administration's response?
Well, Roger Severino has been a great friend of religious freedom, as have others at HHS, and also of human life. So they care about this. But to date, even though we filed our petition back in October of 2018, HHS has yet to grant an exemption for our members. So we're hoping that they will do that soon and address this directly. You know, the fine for not covering this, by the way, is $100 per covered beneficiary per day. That's $36,500 per beneficiary per year. So without a religious exemption in the statute or the regulation, and with fines like that, we need relief, and we hope that HHS Office of Civil Rights will provide it.
Well, Martin, quickly, I know your group represents Catholic employers. What are you hearing from them about this?
Well, Catholic employers that came together, the board of the Catholic Benefits Association includes 6 archbishops and a bishop and several prominent Catholic laypersons. And in fact, our founding chairman of the board is Archbishop Laurie, and one of his key concerns over the years has been religious freedom. He's the former chair of the USCCB Religious Freedom Committee. And they want to provide health care benefits to their employees. Catholic teaching requires that, but they don't want to provide benefits that include contraceptives, abortifacients, sterilization, or certainly they don't want to provide benefits that include tissue harvested from aborted fetuses. So they're concerned about it, and that's why they came together to form the CBA.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time and for your insight on this. We really appreciate it. Martin Nussbaum, General Counsel for the Catholic Benefits Association. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy. Have a good day.
New questions tonight on just when we will have a vaccine. With many states reopening, the question needs to be answered sooner than later. Here on Currents News, we're trying to answer your questions in our weekly segment, Ask the Doctor. Dr. Robert Tabali from the Catholic Medical Association joined Currents News' Christine Persichetti. She started off asking him about a troubling question for many Catholics. What if a vaccine is produced using tissues from abortions? Here's Dr. Tabali.
Two leading vaccine candidates right now that are farthest along actually do arise or have been used fetal tissue. There is another vaccine that is advanced as well that is not using fetal cell lines. The Vatican's directive actually in the past actually issued under the office of Cardinal Ratzinger at the time was recommending that if there are acceptable alternatives, use vaccines raised in a morally acceptable manner. Some of the medicines that are being raised for other complications, in addition to the vaccines, are being raised in hybrid mouse models, which use aborted fetal tissue to hybridize the mice. And so these would be considered to be unethical and immoral, but it would remain to be seen whether or not the Vatican or our church leadership would advise us to partake of these, since there would be no other alternative means in some situations. That being said, me personally, I would not use one of these vaccines if it was raised in the immoral, unethical manner.
Okay, now I want to ask you about some treatments, in particular remdesivir. The drug showed in a study that it improves patients' recovery time. The FDA also plans to announce an emergency use authorization for it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, remdesivir had some early signs in individual patients treated here in the United States, including the first patient in Washington State, where he had a dramatic, or I assume it's a patient, a male. They had a dramatic improvement. Were heading into respiratory failure and actually was able to be discharged several days after receiving the remdesivir. So this appears to be highly active. All these medicines would be more active when given earlier. Now, this study was done in late patients, very sick patients. So China had a similar trial that was done, but this was complicated by use of Chinese herbal medicines, other medicines such as HIV type medicines, in addition to the remdesivir. And plus, the Chinese trials used remdesivir made in China. Actually, the Chinese government has actually patented remdesivir in the use for coronavirus, at least in China. Another theft of intellectual property, supposedly with some license to Gilead Sciences. But this is a great news, actually. There are other medicines that could possibly be used. I talk about favipiravir a lot. It's an oral medicine with a track history used in Japan, used for other things, other RNA viruses.
What about hydroxychloroquine? There's been a couple of conflicting studies. The most recent says it can help patients. What do you think? And we have about 20 seconds.
Hydroxychloroquine has been very helpful for my patients. I have quite a bit of faith in it. And like any medicine, it needs to be used early and not in irretrievable, horrendously sick patients. But I use it all the time.